The interview looked like it was about 4 hours. When we look at the transcripts, it was about 2 hours into it before I was given the sheet that actually told me what the allegations were. I never imagined that my name would be associated with such horrific, horrible allegations. It said rape of a child.
There was absolutely no phone calls to any neighbors, any witnesses, any families, any friends, nothing. Nothing that could prove or disprove anything.
I had nothing. It was as if I was crossing the stream and I got froze in the middle of the stream.
There was no evidence, zero, of any wrongdoing on the part of Chaplain Byers.
And then the mind comes in to say, man, is that me? It's just a mental game that you play with yourself.
When a soldier is flagged, there can be no positive personnel actions taken. And that means you can't get promoted, you can't go to schools, you can't have favorable personnel action, you can't PCS, you can't do anything. So your life is in limbo.
I hit a rock bottom so hard that I was even shaking, thinking that this is it. Life is over. I am Jason Byers, an active duty Army Chaplain, who currently lives in Tully, New York.
My name is Audrey Byers. I am the wife of Chaplain Jason Byers. I met Jason in August of 2002. Jason had just gotten out of the Navy and came to church where my family always attended. He was in the choir. I was in the backseat Baptist, and looked up in the choir and said, "I'm going to marry that hot guy in the choir. You wait and see."
My wife is amazing. God knew what he was doing 22 years ago when we first met.
We got married December 18th of 2004. We have a family. We have 4 kids, and within the last year, we added a golden doodle named Teddy.
My name is Will Helixon. I'm the Warrior Advocate. I'm the founder of the law office of Will M. Helixon.
Describe my job as a chaplain in the Army. Our primary roles are provide and advise. I provide religious support based off the Constitution of the United States, that to ensure that all soldiers have their religious support needs met, or if they don't have a religion at all, we ensure that the soldiers' religious support needs are met throughout the organization. And we also advise the commander, which is advising any commander that we're assigned to in all matters related to religion. One day I was going throughout my normal duties or more normal procedure in school at Syracuse, and I was called by the student detachment commander, who simply said, "You're under investigation for allegations." Didn't tell me the nature of what the allegations were, and said that CID will contact you at some point in the future. I asked further follow-up questions, and he had no answers to, and just said that you will be notified by CID. Currently flagged, you can't PCS, and you can't promote.
When a soldier is flagged, there can be no positive personnel actions taken. And that means you can't get promoted, you can't go to schools, you can't have favorable personnel action, you can't PCS, you can't do anything. So your life is in limbo.
The minute the allegations came through, my first question was not, did you do it, but how did we get here? You spend so much time with somebody your whole life, and I feel like at that point, 20 years later, you know somebody's character. So it wasn't a matter of if you did it, it was a matter of where is this coming from?
When was I notified of the actual allegations? It was on November the 1st, 2023. And so it came through my student detachment commander at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, was the in-between between CID and myself. And so he set up an appointment with the CID agent at Fort Drum, New York, which is because it was closest installation to us. And then I was called in on November the 1st to be able to go to the actual CID location at Fort Drum to give my, to talk with the agents there. At that point, after about a 2-hour beginning of the interview, I was notified of the actual allegations. The interview looked like it was about 4 hours. When we look at the transcripts, it was about 2 hours into it before I was given the sheet that actually told me what the allegations were. It said rape of a child. My world sunk into a very deep pit. I could have never imagined this any kind of allegations being against me, but especially in the nature involving a child. And at that point, whenever I read that on the sheet, I never imagined that my name would be associated with such horrific, horrible allegations. I was sitting in class many days worrying about these allegations and what was the outcome, what were we going to do, instead of paying attention to a program that I was in that the Army was paying for me to go to. I was so consumed with that. And then even with the school portion being open or being over in July of 2024, I had no roles as a chaplain even after that. Where I would have normally at PCS went to another installation, went right into back in my chaplain duties. I had nothing. So it was as if I was crossing the stream and I got froze in the middle of the stream. I couldn't go back, and I couldn't go forward. I did ministry in the chaplain corps for 16 years, and then all of a sudden it came to an immediate stop.
What gaps in the investigation were most concerning to me is that there was absolutely no phone calls to any neighbors, any witnesses, any families, any friends, any youth that we've served with, any pastors, any chaplains, any command, nothing. Nothing that could prove or disprove anything. There was nothing done to advocate for either family. It was driving us crazy not knowing what was going on.
It took a year. So from November the 1st till the referral of charges in November of the next year, there was a full year, roughly 10,500 hours that was spent under that investigative umbrella. It impacted us drastically because every day you think that you're going to get a phone call stating that this is over. Every day that goes by, it's on your mind. You're waking up in the middle of the night thinking about this. You're going throughout your day and relationships are impacted because of this investigation. Every single day during this year period, I thought about this. It impacted me in such a way that it was getting me in some of the most lowest places I ever been in my life. Combat experiences, I was not in these low places. Devastations that had happened, problems over the years, I was not in these low places. But because of the sense of betrayal that I felt from an organization that I thought takes care of their soldiers, that put me in a low, dark place.
I had this text and I got the text and I looked at it and I went, that's not Chaplain Byers. And it was very distressful. It's like he was at a very low point. So I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, hey Chaplain, what's going on? I said, are you okay? And the answer was no. And then we had a serious, long conversation about where he was. And so I had to ask him a series of questions and get him to talk about, what do you mean you're in a dark place? What do you mean you're as low as you've ever been? Have you? And then I start asking him passive suicidal ideation questions like, do you ever feel like maybe it's just best if you don't wake up, right? Because a passive suicidal ideation is you just give up on living. Active suicidal ideation is you think about specific ways to kill yourself. And so after getting information from him, I said, look, Chaplain, you have to go seek attention right now, counseling. I recommended that he goes to the emergency room and whatever they say goes. As soon as I hung up the phone with him, I called my state bar association and I said, I believe that my client has suicidal ideations. I said, to what extent can I disclose privileged information? They said if I believe that it's a threat to his life, that I could disclose confidential information, to which I called the chaplain back and I said, look, I'm going to notify the prosecutors and the command of your passive suicidal ideation and your depression. And I said, I can do it without your permission based on my state bar rules. I said, but I would rather have your permission. And he said, go for it, Will. Think about this. A military career is 20 years. A year-long investigation is 1/20th of your entire career. 1/20th of your entire career. So my concerns were that this investigation was taking too long. And typically, when investigations are taking that long, you have one of two things. Number one, you have extraordinary scientific evidence. You've got DNA, you've got ballistics, you've got blood splatter, you've got multiple experts who have to come in and testify, do analysis, do reports, get lab results, that you have to cross-reference with all kinds of different journal materials and scientific matters. This is a case that was 5 years old. There would be absolutely no genetic material or DNA evidence. So the other hypothesis of why something's taking so long is because people aren't doing their job. And so towards the end, I got very angry and I sent a blistering email to CID, to their command, to include the assistant director and to the general in charge of the Office of Special Trial Counsel. And I told them, I said, look, if you continue down this path and continue dragging out this case, that this case will not end no matter what when it's over. There will be additional investigations going on. And I said, I've had a client kill themselves before, and you're on notice that if something happens to Chaplain Byers, the blood is on your hands.
You don't know who to trust. Whenever you've worked for an organization for so long, now 22 years in the military, 16 years of that in the Army, and I've worked for this organization, I've trusted this organization. Now that trust has been broken. So I didn't know who I could trust. And part of that was in looking at how do you protect what you have built, and then getting around to the fact of the matter is no matter what I'm trying to do, silence leads nowhere. And maybe that's part of the problem too. How do you speak out? And that's where the law firm comes in. That's where Helixon comes in, is how to do that. I'd been both a senior defense counsel and defended many of these cases, and I was a special victim prosecutor, so I knew exactly what would be involved. And what was unique about this case is it was a 5-year delayed report that happened allegedly when the victim was 3 years and 9 months old. So, anytime you get somebody who's accused of a child sex crime, you have to do due diligence, right? Chaplain Byers sounded like an absolutely wonderful person on the phone, and I wanted to confirm that. So I called around, I called a couple of people who knew him, and I had a frank conversation that's like, look, everything aside, everything you know, can you imagine a world in which Chaplain Byers did this? And uniformly, they all said no. And so that was my due diligence, to make sure that there wasn't a situation where people who were vouching for him would actually say, well, I just don't know. What actions did I take when I received the CID file? Well, the first thing that I did is every audio recording I sent and had transcribed verbatim. And then once I had that transcribed, I read every word of every file. And then I analyzed every investigative activity that was in the file. And shockingly, there was no evidence, zero, of any wrongdoing on the part of Chaplain Byers, with the exception of the contradictory statements given by this now 9-year-old based on the questioning of the mother based on her sexually acting out with her sister. I was shocked. I was shocked at the lack of evidence. I was shocked at the poor quality of the evidence. And I was shocked that over the course of a year, the investigative activity could have been done in less than 1 week.
How did I explain the situation to my children? At first, we didn't tell them anything. We were not prepared for a phone call from Child Protective Services on November the 1st of 2023. So I rapidly picked them up from school, at a brand new school where they had been for less than 6 weeks, told them we had an appointment. Their first thing was, we don't have a dentist appointment today, like guessing all the things that they knew they did not have, and having to get them in the car just to vaguely tell them, your daddy has been accused of something awful and we have to go to Child Protective Services. Now is the time. If you've ever felt like you needed to say something against our family or for our family, it's in your hands.
This is a very difficult period of time for people who are accused of crimes because you really can't do much. I tried to get as much information as I could, both from the prosecutor, this was an O-stick prosecutor, and through CID. Problem is they're not going to give you any information. I could glean information about the case based on the interview that Chaplain Byers did with CID. Contrary to what I would have advised him to do, before he called me, he had already spent 4 hours in a CID interview talking about the case. And so by debriefing him, I could figure out, hey, the person who is accused of this crime had a beard. This happened during a certain period of time. So I took the information gleaned from that investigation, gleaned from his interview, and then used that information to try to leverage additional information from the prosecutor and from CID. They wouldn't budge. The only thing that they would do is say, hey, will your client do a polygraph? And typically, I say no to polygraph. But in this instance, I called Chaplain Byers back and I asked him, I said, hey, will you pass a polygraph? And he's like, absolutely, I will. I said, now understand, just because you're telling the truth doesn't mean you're going to pass a polygraph. Are you able to honestly answer questions and have no indication of deception? Meaning, do you get nervous easy? Do you have a twitch? Do you have any type of medical condition that might give a false indication of deception? And he said no. So I contacted CID back and I said, sure, we'll do a poly under our conditions. And our conditions are, if no deception is indicated, you dismiss the case. They said no way.
How did I react when I got the phone call from Will that they had actually preferred court-martial charges? Devastated. I never imagined it moving forward to preferring charges. So you have a whole year that you're just waiting on CID. You have a whole year that you're not doing you're performing your duties as whatever your calling is in the military. Mine is a chaplain. You have a whole year that you're speculating the worst case scenario. You have a whole year that you're thinking, well, surely it wouldn't go to that. And so a whole year of going through, surely they're turning our life upside down. Then for them to prefer charges led to a further darkness, even more so than what I didn't think I would be able to get further into. That would have been November of 2024. And I hit a rock bottom so hard that I was even shaking, thinking that this is it. Life is over. I'm never going to be able to make it. I just want my family to be finished with this. They'd be better off without me. Ruminating this, negotiating in my head that I'm the reason why they're having to go through this mess. And then to just once again have my wife there to remind me that this is not us, this is not me. That gave me energy. That gave me hope, even after the charges were preferred.
I think there's power in the spoken word. You have to get above the noises in your head, above their voices, to know that the things being said about you are not true. And for us, that's taking things and filling our heads what the Lord says about us. That He is fighting for us, that we have to be still, that He has given us Will as our advocate to say what we would want to say in that room that day. It is a very emotional day. It is a hard day. You never expect yourself to be sitting there having to be quiet, but knowing that being quiet in that moment is the right thing to do.
What were my thoughts when I was notified that the case was being preferred? I thought they must have had some people who came forward and said, yeah, we've had similar allegations against Chaplain Byers. Because there would be no other reason other than some evidence that indicated that the testimony of this 9-year-old, who was 3 at the time, had credibility, because she initially gave an interview, to a forensic interview, and then 3 weeks later did a second forensic interview that were contradictory in part, and misidentified Chaplain Byers. She described him as somebody having a beard, and Chaplain Byers has never had a beard. He's been on active duty the whole time. So there were concerns about the initial report, which was actually drawn out by the mother, right? The alleged victim was acting out sexually with her sister, and so her mother started questioning her. So the mother started asking questions, which is really not very good with respect to an initial report, because a parent is drawing information out. And when that happens, the child wants to satisfy the parent and will tell the parent basically what the parent is trying to get from. And so I had concerns about that investigation. And my concerns then carried over that when we were notified of the referral, they absolutely had to have additional reports of some type of misconduct with the child. That was my initial thought. First expert that I called was a child forensic interviewer. And I asked the interviewer to take a look at the 2 interviews, and I got initial feedback from them. And that expert pointed out to me several aspects of the first 2 forensic interviews that didn't follow protocol. When it did follow protocol, it was done incorrectly. And the leading questions from the interviewer, and the fact that at one point in time, the child asked stop, they stopped the recording, and there was a 20-minute gap to where this child went and talked to the mother, and then came back, and then was able to say the name of the people who she had spent the night with, when she couldn't identify it before she had the 20-minute gap and talked to them all. So we were concerned with that, and I had that expert. I also consulted an adolescent memory expert, somebody who could talk about the formation of language combined with memory, so that we could determine whether somebody who was 3.5 years old had sufficient language skills to associate with memory to even give memory meaning, right? Because you've got to have language skills before memory can have meaning, right? And then I discussed what effect trauma has over the course of 5 years with memory, right? Let's assume that somebody else traumatized this child. What effect does that have on the formation of memory? And then we talked about juxtaposition of memories over time, meaning you're remembering that person A did something to you when in fact person B did something to you at a different time and sequence. So I also consulted a memory expert. I also consulted a forensic pediatrician who gave me advice with respect to other issues that this child was experiencing, physical maladies that may have affected memory. So those were the 3 experts that I immediately consulted.
I don't have a lot of experience with law and Article 32, but I cannot imagine anybody else being as detailed as Will M. Helixon. And I say that not just to say it. I say it in such a way because it was a 935-page plus document that he presented to the FOE, the preliminary hearing officer. And in that document, as I read through it, it was all the evidence. It was everything that the prosecution had submitted, everything that they had, and it was laid out in such a way that there was highlighted areas here, there's notes there, there's things that as the whoever's reading that document, to include the prosecution, that they can see all these different details, all these different notes. And also, I was able to even capture, okay, this is Will's thought process through it. And even at the end of it, there's all this data, there's all this information, there's all this research based on previous cases and what happens in certain cases. And so within 935-page plus document, it's not just a novel you're reading through. It is a very detailed approach to, this is how I'm presenting the case. This is where we feel like the evidence is. This is where we feel like the prosecution and the investigators failed to do the right thing. And so he was very, very much, and oh, by the way, even going into that, he prepared us in such a way that he came and sat with us the day before and told us this is what's going to happen at the Article 32.
How did Will prepare us both for the Article 32 hearing? Will had all of his ducks in a row with everything that he could have laid out and everything that he did not lay out. But he was prepared either way to make a rash decision or quick decision when he needed to. He had told us the way that we possibly could have been treated when we walked in the door. He had warned us about the stigma around things, but was there in case we needed anybody. We knew we had someone to fight for us.
Typically, I do not do anything much for an Article 32 investigation. I show up, I make the government tell me what their case is, and I make them tell the investigating officer what the elements of the offense are and how they're going to prove it. Kind of get a map, a road map of how they're going to prove the case. In this case, there was a probability that we could kill it at the Article 32 level, meaning we could get the preliminary hearing officer to say that there was no probable cause. The problem with that is, if I do a full frontal assault on the government, then I show all of my cards. I let them know what our counterattack is. Now, the benefits of that is the case would go away. However, the preliminary hearing officer only makes a recommendation that's not binding on the convening authority. Meaning, even if the preliminary hearing officer agreed with us and there's no probable cause, the convening authority could still say, no, this case is going to go to trial. And so if I give all of my cards and put them on the table, a good prosecutor who's worth their weight in salt is going to take that evidence and go, okay, here's how I beat this argument, here's how I beat this argument, here's what I need to do for this argument, here's what I need to do for that argument. And so what I decided is that I was going to do a almost full frontal, withholding 3 or 4 key pieces of evidence for trial. And I drafted a memorandum requesting different witnesses and requesting different evidence. It was a 30 or 35 page memorandum pointing out all of the deficiencies in the investigation and all the things that we were going to do at trial, all the experts that we were going to call at trial, all the deficiencies in the forensic interview. And then I had attachments, studies that I had come up with, studies that I had found, evidence that was provided to me by our experts, and I compiled that in a document. I think the full document was about 935 pages, and I submitted that to the investigating officer.
What was the finding of the foe? The foe came back and said no probable cause.
The government immediately objected, asked them for reconsideration. I wrote a response brief to that, and then the preliminary hearing officer, after about 3 weeks, came back and said, no, still no probable cause. It's at that time that the government reopened the investigation by asking CID to go back, reopen the case, and conduct further investigation.
He came back a second time and said no probable cause.
What were my thoughts when the government reopened the investigation? I thought, well, that's mighty fine after 14 months that they're finally doing what they're supposed to do, right? And it took the defense telling them, hey, did you interview these 15 witnesses? Did you talk to these commanders? Did you go to this location and take pictures of the house, right? They had pictures of the exterior of the house. They didn't have pictures of the interior of the house. They didn't even go on the website of the housing office and pull down the floor plan that I pulled down. So I was relieved that they were going to finally do additional investigation based on our analysis, because I knew that if they asked the questions of the witnesses that we provided and they talked to the people that we suggested, that it was going to come back favorable to us.
What did the government do when he came back a second time with no probable cause? They sat on it for a period of time, but then ultimately came back and said they are dismissing all charges without prejudice.
We were very excited that the case was dismissed. I was in a different state than my husband was, so it was really nice for our family to be with people that had stood by our side from the beginning, to be able to tell them it's been dismissed, and then to come home a few days later to just be able to celebrate that as our family, that it had been dismissed.
I said, late justice is still justice, right? It took 18 months from the time they started the investigation until they made the decision to dismiss the case. And, it's unfortunate that it really adversely affected the lives of my clients, their family, their personal relationship, their professional responsibilities, even friendships that they had were all adversely affected.
Do I believe that they would have dismissed charges if I would not have had William Helixon as my attorney? No, I don't. I know that God put us in contact with Will for a reason, and I know it was the only lawyer that could represent Byers' family. And I do not think that I would have had the same outcome if I had not had the law office of William M. Helixon.
I understand that within the legal system, there's certain things we can say, certain things we shouldn't say, but I don't want anybody to ever feel like they were alone, whether it's a 3-month process or 19-month process, the way that it was in our family. I want them to know that there is a family out there that will advocate with them, stand by them, and that they are not alone.
Don't do this alone. Don't do this alone, and don't take on the identity that the prosecution and the investigators want you to take on. You are not that person. These are false allegations. Remember that they are false allegations. Don't ever think that you're that person. Don't ever think that you're alone in this journey. Don't ever think that you can't trust people, because you can. You can trust your spouse who's walking on that journey together with you. You can trust William Helixon and his law firm and all his warrior advocates that are part of his team. And you have to. Remember, do not walk this journey alone. Keep communication with your lawyer, with your spouse if you have a spouse. Keep that open communication.
There's always going to be somebody out there that's telling the truth, and there's always going to be someone out there that could be lying. Stand by them. Hear what they have to say. Make your own decisions. Don't be quick to leave. Don't be quick to run. Communicate. Communication doesn't start when something bad happens. Communication is something that is worked on throughout a whole relationship.
And never lose faith. Never lose faith. Continue to trust. Trust that God's got you. And He's bringing these people into your path for a reason. And God is going to help you with all these different elements to help you get through this.